Claude responded. At 63, after 19 years as a widower, I told my daughter I was getting married again. At 63, after 19 years as a widower, I told my daughter I was getting married again. Denise smiled and said, "That's great, Dad, but before the wedding, we need to talk about setting up power of attorney just to keep things simple." Then my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from a lawyer I'd never met, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That Thursday started like most late October days in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. The lake wind had teeth in it already, rattling the storm windows I still hadn't finished installing. My right shoulder ached from 34 years of hauling equipment at the paper mill, a souvenir that showed up whenever the temperature dropped. I'd spent the morning smoking a brisket in the backyard, the same recipe my late wife Carol used to tease me about ruining every 4th of July until I finally got it right. Denise had always fought her brother for the burnt ends. I picked up a 6-pack of the good root beer, the kind in glass bottles, because Denise's husband Mark didn't drink, and I never made anyone feel strange about it. I'd asked Denise and Mark to come alone, no kids this time. I wanted to tell them about Linda myself, the way a father should, before anyone else heard it secondhand. Denise and Mark pulled into the driveway a few minutes after 5, Mark's pickup crunching over the gravel I kept meaning to repave. Mark carried in a bag of chips like it was an afterthought. Denise hugged me a beat longer than usual, which should have told me something, though I didn't catch it then. She set her purse on the counter, the same spot where Carol used to leave her reading glasses every evening after work. Dinner started easy enough. Mark complained about the price of diesel. Denise mentioned that her son Tyler had made the honor roll again, and I asked if he still wanted that telescope for Christmas. "He hasn't stopped talking about it," she said. "Must run in the family," I said. "Your grandfather used to point out constellations to me off the back porch." Denise smiled at that, a real smile, and for a second I thought maybe I was imagining the tension underneath everything. The radio in the kitchen was playing low, some classic rock station fading in and out. My furnace kicked on with its familiar rattle. I set down my fork. "I've got some news," I said. Mark looked up first. "You finally selling the boat?" "No. You should. That thing hasn't left the driveway in 2 summers. I asked Linda to marry me." The room went quiet in that particular way. A room goes quiet when nobody wants to be the first to react. I heard the ice maker drop a cube in the freezer. Denise looked at Mark before she looked at me. Mark blinked, then smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere past the mouth. "Well," he said, "congratulations, Frank." He reached over and shook my hand. It felt like shaking hands with a stranger at a funeral. "When did this happen?" Denise asked. "Sunday. We walked the pier in Manitowoc, had dinner after. I asked her over coffee. She said yes before I even finished the sentence." "That's wonderful," Denise said. Her voice carried warmth, but her hand had stopped moving around her glass of water. Mark leaned back in his chair. "When's the wedding?" "Spring, probably. Small ceremony at the Lutheran church. Nothing big." "Have you two talked about protecting your assets?" There it was. Not congratulations. Not are you happy. Protecting your assets. "We've talked about a prenup, if that's what you mean." Denise folded her napkin with more care than the napkin required. "That's good. Second marriages get complicated. Especially with the house and your 401k and mom's life insurance money." Mark cleared his throat. "What Denise means is we just want you looked after." "Looked after from what? From Linda?" "From complications," Denise said, her expression softening in a way that felt rehearsed, like she was talking to Tyler after a bad grade. "Nobody thinks Linda's after anything, but people change when money enters the picture." "Which people exactly?" She didn't answer that one directly. Mark stepped in instead. "Frank, you worked 34 years for what you have. Mom worked for it too." That one landed harder than he probably meant it to. Carol had worked the front desk at the elementary school for over a decade before the cancer took her. After she died, I picked up every double shift the mill offered. I sold the boat's twin, the one Carol and I bought before she got sick, just to keep Denise in the state school without loans. Nobody needed to remind me who built this life. Denise reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. She set it on the table between the ketchup and the root beer. "We spoke to someone about a durable power of attorney," she said. "Just as a precaution. Nothing's final. I just want you to look at it." Mark slid the papers toward me. The words swam for a second, not because I couldn't read them, but because some part of me didn't want to. Draft, durable power of attorney. Agent, Denise M. Kowalski. Authority over real property, banking and brokerage accounts, retirement disbursements, and all future financial decisions on behalf of the principal. I looked up at my daughter. You want legal control of my money? That's not how I'd put it. It's written right here in plain English. You'd still have full access to everything. This is just for protection, in case something ever happened. Something like what? Mark rubbed the back of his neck. Come on, Frank, don't make this into something it isn't. I'm not the one who brought paperwork to a dinner where I announced my engagement. Denise's voice went gentle again. You can still marry Linda. Nobody's trying to stop that. Mark nodded. Marry her if that's what makes you happy. We just think, before the wedding, it makes sense to have this in place. For the family. I stared at my daughter's face, the same face that used to fall asleep against my shoulder during Packers games when she was 7, gloves still on her hand from t-ball practice. I used to carry her up to bed without waking her. Now she sat across the table calculating what I'd be allowed to keep. Have you already decided how much longer I'm capable of running my own life? That's not fair, Denise said, her jaw tightening. No, what's not fair is this feeling less like protecting me and more like the two of you dividing things up while I'm still sitting right here eating dinner. We're thinking about Tyler and Emma's future, Mark said. Future from what? College costs? Or the possibility I might spend my own money before I die? Denise pushed back from the table slightly. You're twisting this. No, I'm finally hearing it clearly. That was when my phone buzzed on the counter. Once, then again. I walked over, my shoulders stiff from the cold snap outside. It was a calendar invitation, already accepted on my behalf, scheduling a meeting at a law office in Fond du Lac for the following Tuesday. Subject line: Kowalski Family Estate Planning Initial Consultation. I hadn't agreed to any consultation. I hadn't even known this lawyer's name until that moment. You already scheduled this, I said, holding up the phone. Before you even told me you wanted it. Denise's face went pale. Mark stared at his plate. We were hoping you'd just come around to it naturally, Mark said. The folder wasn't a suggestion, was it? It was the backup plan in case I said no at dinner. Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't come to celebrate my engagement. They'd come to manage the fallout of it, and they'd started managing it before I ever opened my mouth. You scheduled a lawyer before you knew I was getting married? I said quietly. This was never about Linda. Denise looked down at the table. We knew you wouldn't just agree if we asked outright. That's the moment I understood, I said, more to myself than to them. You two didn't come here worried about me. You came here worried about the money. The brisket sat untouched, grease congealing at the edges of the plate. The kitchen smelled like hickory smoke and cold coffee. Mark finally spoke. We didn't want it to come to this. Then why was that invitation sitting in my calendar 3 days before I even told you I was engaged? He didn't have an answer. Denise stood, gathered her folder, and said the lawyers would explain everything better than she could. Then they left. I watched their taillights disappear down County Road IH without either of them looking back. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt too quiet in a way it hadn't in years, not since the first winter after Carol died. Around 1 in the morning, I gave up pretending I might drift off. I made coffee that tasted like tar and sat at the kitchen table with my phone, rereading that calendar invite over and over, like it might say something different the 4th time. The next morning, I called Gerald Whitfield. I'd known Gerald since high school, back when we both worked summers at the cannery. He'd handled Carol's estate when she passed. He picked up on the second ring. Frank, it's early for you. Denise wants power of attorney over everything. Scheduled it with a lawyer before she even asked me. There was a pause. Come to my office. Gerald's office sat above the hardware store downtown. Same creaking stairs, same jar of butterscotch candies that had probably been there since the Reagan administration. He read through everything I showed him, the calendar invite, a screenshot Denise had accidentally left open on her laptop the last time she visited, showing a folder titled Dad's Assets Draft. This isn't guardianship, not yet, Gerald said, folding his glasses. But make no mistake, a durable power of attorney handed to someone who isn't you is nearly as serious. Once you sign it, they can move money, sell property, make decisions, all without asking you first. Can they force this? Not without your signature. Not unless they escalate to something like a competency proceeding, which would mean convincing a court you can't manage your own affairs. Would they actually do that? Gerald looked at me carefully. Based on what you've shown me, I wouldn't rule it out. That night, Linda came by with a casserole dish, the same way she always did when she sensed something was wrong before I'd said a word. We sat on my back porch, jackets zipped against the wind coming off the lake 3 miles east. I told her everything. When I mentioned the folder labeled with my name like an asset file, her eyes filled. "This is because of me," she said. "No. If we weren't getting married, none of this happens." "Linda, maybe we should wait a year, 2. I looked at her. "And if they still object in 2 years? 5? She didn't answer, because we both already knew the answer. I reached for her hand and she let me hold it this time. "I spent 19 years thinking my job was making things easy for Denise," I said. "Every time she struggled, I stepped in before she even had to ask. Maybe somewhere in there, I taught her that my life was just a resource she'd eventually inherit control of." Linda squeezed my hand. Neither of us said anything else for a long while. Some nights, the quiet says more than words could. 3 days later, Gerald called with the kind of voice that meant bad news. They filed something, a petition for a limited conservatorship. They're framing it as protective, related to a fall you had last spring, and some memory concerns they claim you've mentioned. My stomach dropped. I twisted my ankle on the ice. I never said anything about memory. Doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is what's written down and how it's presented to a judge. I read the petition myself that night at the kitchen table. It mentioned the ankle. It mentioned a missed oil change on my truck. It mentioned that I'd bought Linda a diamond pendant for our engagement, described as an uncharacteristically large expenditure, inconsistent with the principal's historical spending patterns. I'd spent more than that fixing Mark's roof after the hailstorm 2 years back. Nobody had questioned my judgment then. The section that stopped me cold referenced my annual physical, where I'd mentioned trouble sleeping after my blood pressure medication changed. My doctor adjusted the dosage. That was the entire story. No diagnosis, no cognitive concern noted anywhere in my actual medical file. Somebody had taken an ordinary doctor's visit and dressed it up to sound like the beginning of something much darker. I sat with that for a long time. You don't have to actually be losing your mind to feel like someone's already decided you are. The following week, Gerald and I sat at his conference table building what he called the other side of the story. We listed every dollar I'd given Denise and Mark over the years without ever asking for it back. The down payment on their first house. The loan when Mark's landscaping business nearly folded during a bad winter. 6 months of their mortgage. Tyler's daycare. Emma's braces. The roof after the hailstorm. By late afternoon, Gerald had the total. $291,000, give or take. "I didn't realize it added up to that much," I said. "Most parents don't," Gerald said. "You know what's interesting? You never once asked for any of it back." "She's my daughter." Gerald nodded slowly. "And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about being your daughter and started being about being your client." That sentence sat with me the rest of the night, mostly because it wasn't wrong. Linda brought her own folder to the next meeting. Property records for the ranch house she owned outright in Kohler, paid off 11 years ago. Statements from her teacher's pension after 29 years in the district. A draft prenuptial agreement she'd asked her own lawyer to prepare before I'd even suggested one. "You didn't need to do this," I told her. "I wanted to," she said. "I never wanted your money. I wanted somebody to complain about the Packers' offensive line with." That actually made me laugh, the first real laugh in 2 weeks. The hearing landed on a gray Thursday morning at the Sheboygan County Courthouse. I got there 40 minutes early out of habit. 34 years of factory shifts had trained that into me permanently. Gerald was already on the bench outside, legal pad on his knee. "Sleep at all?" "A little. That's more than most people manage before one of these." Linda arrived a few minutes later in a plain navy dress, sat beside me, and took my hand without a word. Across the hallway, Denise and Mark walked in with their attorney. Denise gave me a small, tight nod, the kind you'd give a coworker in an elevator. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television. Just wooden benches, the state flag, a judge's bench worn smooth by decades of use. Judge Patricia Alvarez called our case shortly after 9. Denise and Mark's attorney went first, calm and measured, careful to say nobody believed I was a bad man. He walked through the ankle injury, the missed oil change, the pendant, the medication adjustment, presenting each one like a puzzle piece that only formed a picture once you stood back far enough. Listening to a stranger narrate your own life back to you, turning ordinary mistakes into a pattern of decline, was its own particular kind of strange. Then Gerald stood. He didn't raise his voice. Your Honor, getting older isn't the same thing as becoming incapable. It just means someone has had more time to live. He submitted an independent cognitive evaluation I'd sat for the week before, 2 hours of questions that felt less medical and more like an audition for adulthood. The judge read it, then looked up. Mr. Kowalski, please come forward. I was sworn in. She asked her own first question. Can you tell me your current sources of income? I listed my mill pension, Social Security, a small consulting arrangement with a former colleague's logistics company. Who manages those funds currently? I do. I do. Have you asked Miss Reyes to manage any of your finances? No. Has she asked to? Never. Denise's attorney approached next. You purchased a pendant valued around $3,800 for Miss Reyes? I did. Why? Because I love her, and I'm 63 years old, and I finally have something worth celebrating. A few soft smiles moved through the gallery. You've missed routine maintenance on your vehicle? Once. I was distracted. You slipped on ice last spring? I did. I live in Wisconsin. It happens to 20-year-olds too. So you admit some difficulty managing daily responsibilities? No, I said, looking at him directly. I admit I'm getting older. If forgetting an oil change means I lose the right to run my own life, half this county should be sitting up here with me. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. Even Judge Alvarez's mouth twitched. Gerald's questioning came next. He walked through the prenuptial agreement, the fact that Linda owned her home outright, her pension, her total lack of any financial need from me whatsoever. Then he set the $291,000 ledger on the evidence table, walking Denise and Mark through every entry, every unpaid loan, every gift given freely, and never once mentioned again until now. Did your father voluntarily provide these funds? Gerald asked Mark directly. Yes. Was repayment ever discussed? A few times. Was it ever repaid? Mark's voice dropped. No. Gerald turned to Denise. When did you first schedule a consultation regarding power of attorney over your father's finances? Denise hesitated. The week before the dinner. And when did your father announce his engagement? That same dinner. So the consultation was scheduled before he'd even told you the news. The courtroom went still. In that particular way, rooms go still when something true finally lands out loud. Judge Alvarez looked over her glasses at Denise. Has any physician diagnosed your father with dementia? No. With any cognitive impairment whatsoever? No. Has he failed to pay any bill, lost money to any scam, or shown any documented inability to understand his own finances? Denise's voice was barely audible. No. Then what, precisely, prompted this petition? Nobody answered. The silence did the answering instead. Judge Alvarez recessed for 15 minutes that felt like 15 years. When she returned, she spoke plainly. The court finds no credible evidence that Mr. Kowalski lacks capacity to manage his own affairs. The petition for conservatorship is denied and dismissed. I didn't feel victorious so much as I finally felt like I could breathe again. Outside the courtroom, Denise caught up with me near the elevator. Dad, I turned to face her. We were scared, she said. You were scared I might spend my own money before you could plan around it, I said quietly. You never once stopped to ask whether treating me like I couldn't be trusted with my own life might cost you your father. She opened her mouth, nothing came out. I gently raised a hand, and Linda slipped her arm through mine, and we walked out through the courthouse doors into November air that felt colder than when we'd gone in, though somehow I felt lighter than I had in weeks. We postponed the wedding 6 weeks, not out of doubt, but because I needed time to remember my life still belonged to me and not to a committee. Linda never pushed. Some evenings we walked the pier without talking much, and the silence between us had changed. It felt earned now, instead of avoided. We married on a cold Saturday in the same Lutheran church I'd attended my whole life. 30-some guests, roast chicken and green beans in the fellowship hall, a playlist of old country songs through church speakers instead of a DJ. Denise wasn't there. I thought about her more than once that day, reached for my phone more than once, put it back in my pocket every time. Love doesn't vanish just because someone hurts you, but forgiveness doesn't run on anybody else's schedule either. The following week, Gerald and I rebuilt my estate plan from scratch, not out of anger this time, but out of clarity. Linda would have the right to stay in the house as long as she wanted. After that, proceeds would go into a trust for Tyler and Emma, education and first home expenses only, nothing Denise or Mark could ever manage or touch directly. Not punishment, just boundaries I should have drawn years earlier. 2 months later, Mark called about a transmission that had gone out on his truck. Old habits nearly took over. Ask how much, apologize on his behalf internally, reach for my checkbook. Instead, I asked if he'd gotten an estimate, told him it sounded rough, offered to help him compare shops, and told him plainly I wouldn't be paying for it. The silence on the other end lasted a long time before he said he understood. Nearly 5 months after the hearing, I was out back fixing a section of fence that had come loose in a windstorm when a truck pulled into the driveway. Denise climbed out, work gloves already on her hands. "Figured you could use a second set of hands," she said. We worked mostly in silence for a few hours, talking about nothing important and everything important at once. When we finished, she told me she'd started seeing a counselor. Her counselor had asked her once why she kept calling my money our future instead of my life. Denise hadn't had an answer for a long time. Eventually, she landed on one. "An inheritance is a gift," she said quietly. "Not a retirement plan." I nodded, and something in my chest loosened that had been tight for months. "You hungry?" I asked. "I've got leftover brisket." Her eyes filled, and she said she hadn't had my brisket in years. We didn't talk about the courthouse or the petition that afternoon. Some wounds don't heal in a single conversation. They heal one ordinary Saturday at a time. Looking back, the real lesson was never about the money. It was about boundaries, and about how loving someone doesn't mean rescuing them from every consequence forever. What I learned at 63 is that real love sometimes means stepping back, telling the truth even when it costs you something, and letting the people you love carry the weight of their own choices. If you've ever struggled to hold on to love and boundaries at the same time, I hope you know you're not the only one standing in that kitchen wondering how it got so complicated. Sometimes protecting your own peace is the kindest thing you can do for everyone at that table, even when it doesn't feel that way the night it happens. Claude responded, "Real love isn't measured by how much you rescue someone from their own choices. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go and let them stand on their own. Real love isn't measured by how much you rescue someone from their own choices. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go and let them stand on their own feet." Boundaries and love aren't opposites. Drawing a clear line can be the very proof that you still care. And it's never too late to choose peace, honesty, and a fresh start, no matter your age. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine, heartfelt life lesson along the way.